I've always been fascinated by the hidden stories of history, and today we're uncorking a tale that's been fermenting for decades. It's a story of rebellion, resourcefulness, and social revolution, all swirling in a potent cocktail we call Prohibition. But this isn't just about bootleggers and speakeasies, it's about the women who shaped an era, one bottle at a time. Let's set the scene. It's January 17th, 1920, and America has just embarked on its noble experiment, Prohibition. The 18th Amendment has turned the nation dry overnight, banning the production, transport, and sale of alcohol. But how did we get here? Well, it all started with a little thing called the Temperance movement. And let me tell you, it wasn't just a bunch of stuffy old men wagging their fingers at the evils of drink. No, sir, women were at the forefront of this crusade, wielding their moral authority like a sledgehammer against the saloon doors. Now, you might be wondering, who were these firebrands leading the charge? Let me introduce you to some of the heavy hitters. First up, we've got Carrie Nation, and boy, did she live up to her name. Standing 6 feet tall and wielding a hatchet, Carrie took the phrase, smash the bottle, quite literally. Frances Willard, president of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, turned the organization into a powerhouse. And let's not forget Ida B. Wells Barnett, who saw temperance as a way to fight racial injustice. These women weren't just fighting against alcohol, they were fighting for a seat at the table in American politics. Now, Prohibition didn't just drive alcohol underground, it drove social life there too. And guess who was leading the charge into this brave new world? That's right, women. Speakeasies became the new frontier of female liberation. In these hidden haunts, women would drink, smoke, and dance with abandon, free from the stomach constraints of club society. Take Texas Guinan, the queen of the nightclubs. She ran some of the hottest spots in town, famously greeting patrons with a wink and a "hello, sucker." Women's social clubs also boomed during this era. Now, let's talk about the dark side of Prohibition, the bootleggers and rum runners who kept America's thirst quenched. And surprise, surprise, women were right in the thick of it. In fact, some of the most successful and notorious bootleggers were women. Take Gertrude Cleo Lithgow, known as the Bahama Queen. She ran $1 million bootlegging operation out of the Bahamas. Or how about Gloria de Casares, the Tequila Queen, who smuggled high-quality liquor across the Mexican border? These women weren't just breaking the law, they were shattering glass ceilings in the criminal underworld. But not all women were on the wrong side of the law during Prohibition. In fact, some of the most effective Prohibition agents were women. The federal government hired over 100 female Prohibition agents, known as dry chicks, to go undercover and bust speakeasies. These ladies used their wits, charm, and sometimes their fists to bring down bootleggers and speakeasy owners. On the flip side, arrests of women for drunkenness skyrocketed during Prohibition. In New York City, arrests of women for intoxication increased by 200% between 1920 and 1928. It seems that making alcohol illegal only made it more tempting for many women. The jails were so full of female offenders that some cities had to open special women's courts to handle the caseload. Now let's talk about how Prohibition changed the way women looked and behaved. The flapper wasn't just a fashion statement, she was a full-blown cultural revolution. Smoking in public, which had been taboo for women, became commonplace. In 1923 alone, women bought 5 billion cigarettes. And let's not forget dancing. The Charleston, the Black Line, the shimmy. These wild dances were perfect for cramped speakeasies, and women were leading the charge on the dance floor. Short hair, short skirts, and lots of makeup were all ways of thumbing their noses at traditional values. And boy, did it catch on. By 1924, the US was using 60 million lipsticks a year. When it came to spreading the word about Prohibition, both for and against women were front and center. The Women's Christian Temperance Union published a weekly newspaper, the Union Signal, with a circulation of 100,000 at its peak. On the other side, women like Pauline Sabin used their platforms to argue for repeal, founding the Women's Organization for National Prohibition Reform in 1929. Interestingly enough, the image of women in alcohol advertising changed dramatically during this period. Before Prohibition, women were often shown as victims of male drunkenness. But in the underground advertising of the Prohibition era, women were portrayed as sophisticated drinkers themselves. It was a subtle but significant shift in how society viewed women's relationship with alcohol. As the 1920s roared on, many women began to have second thoughts about prohibition. By 1930, more women favored repeal than supported continuing prohibition. Women like Pauline Sabin led the charge for repeal, arguing that prohibition had failed to improve society. When the 21st Amendment was ratified in 1933, ending prohibition, women's groups were among its strongest supporters. It was a remarkable turnaround from just 13 years earlier. Through their involvement in the temperance movement, women gained valuable experience in political organizing and public speaking. These skills would prove crucial in the fight for suffrage and other women's rights issues. In the decades following Prohibition, women continued to break barriers and enter new professions. Women increasingly took on leadership roles, reshaping their place in American society. From temperance crusaders to bootleggers, from flappers to federal agents, women of the Prohibition era challenged societal norms and expanded the boundaries of what was possible. Their legacy continues to influence us today, proving that sometimes the most intoxicating thing of all is the taste of freedom.